And with Kevin, I thought what was really good is you said challenge orthodoxy, essentially. So getting people to challenge basic assumptions. And from Rajan, I think he was saying that the HVAC industry we need to move the needle, or the HVAC industry needs to move, which I think the Global Cooling Prize was definitely encouraging. Okay, so over to you now. If we do have questions from the floor, I'm looking around. Oh yes, I think it's Tim.
Hi. Hello?
It should be on, Tim, just if you...
Okay, well, we'll try. My name is Tim Dwyer from UCL and CIBSE and various other places. Just a general question. I looked down the list of papers in the special issue that you're building this around, and I think it's just one paper actually co-authored by Dan on refurbishment and retrofit. To me, that's the big challenge. I was listening quite carefully to what you all said, and I don't think I heard refurbishment or retrofit or anything of that matter coming into it. But I know, of course, you're very aware of this. I wonder what should be done to make sure that we are capable of retrofitting, refurbishing buildings so they can use alternatives to air conditioning.
Yes, thank you, Tim. A very important question. And of course, with refurbishment of buildings, there is a paradox, particularly relevant to residential, where as we improve the performance of our housing stock to reduce heating demand, of course we increase the risk of overheating in the summer, depending on, of course, on how we do retrofit. But there are paradoxes and, in a sense, unintended consequences there. Mike.
I think that's an excellent point, Tim. And I think we've been critical of the UK government, but I think one area in which there has been progress has been Part O of the regulations, which now addresses overheating in new homes, but it doesn't yet address refurbishment and overheating, and I think that's a critical aspect that we've repeatedly as a committee asked government to address. So really encouraging to see that now for new homes, but I think it needs to be followed by a similar process for existing homes, and also linking it to Part F, the ventilation, to ensure that as you're doing that, you're not compromising air quality in the homes, and Part F now does. So I think there's been some very encouraging progress in that area. So I think where we can give praise, we would like to do that. But I think it's an excellent point. I mean, really vital. Over the last few years, even there's been hundreds of thousands of homes, new homes built that are now going to have to be refurbished, which is a real shame.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's an excellent point, Tim, as ever from you. I mean, I think there is guidance that it exists for refurbishment, and not as much as there is for new build. Specifically on this topic, from CIBSE, we've got Technical Memorandum 59 for design methodology for the assessment of overheating risk in homes. That applies to refurbs as well as new build. We've got TM55, which is designed for future climate, which has lots of case studies actually in that. And then I could go on. So there is some guidance there, and but there is a tendency when we talk, we do tend to think about new build and overlook the big challenges with the existing building stock, which is a huge challenge, isn't it? You're right.
Yes, if I may comment, I think in the UK we tend to talk down the characteristics and the performance of much of our existing housing stock. It is true. It is the case that much of our housing stock does not perform well in winter, and so we have a need for insulation. However, one of the characteristics of our housing stock, which is a benefit, is that much of it is heavyweight or potentially high capacitance. And we should be using that as part of our strategy to prevent overheating, and so to be very careful in the way we insulate to not lose that positive attribute. Do you want to comment, Sheila, or shall we?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Yes, I would like to make a comment. It's a good question, because if we think about the building stock that we have now, most of the buildings that exist today are going to continue to be around in 20, 30, 40, 50 years and beyond. And so we have to think about the decisions that we're making, whether it's new construction or retrofit refurbishment. The decisions we're making now are going to stick around for a long time. So it's really important that we think about this carefully and that we find solutions that have longevity and that will help us as we are transitioning to creating built environments, whether it's a residential or commercial space, that continue to serve the needs of the occupants moving forward in the most energy efficient way possible. But something else that I'd like to bring forward is, as we are thinking about overheating in the summertime, in other words, providing cooling, and how do you do that? I like the solutions that my colleagues here have been saying so far. But we also need to keep in mind that refrigerants are a major source to the greenhouse gas emissions that are occurring on this planet. And as a result, the building sector is a large contributor to the accumulation of greenhouse gases in our atmosphere. And it's largely because of the refrigerants that we are using in our systems in our building. Do we have choices? Well, choices come down to having that holistic approach that you mentioned earlier, Brian, that I'm thinking about, like the ability for that building to use the passive design features of it, such as storing the cool of the space. And how do we take advantage of the building being able to store that cool through its building materials so that we don't have to provide mechanical cooling? Or how do we design the space so that we have shading, because of the structure of the building itself is shading it so that you don't have the direct solar gains in that space that you don't have to remove through mechanical cooling. That type of holistic thinking is really necessary as we are considering solutions for both our existing building stock as well as new construction. And it's a shift. We don't prioritize those things all the time now, and we need to do more of that, but we can. There are solutions that we can think about soon.
Indeed, indeed. I'd like to bring in Rajan if you're here with us, Rajan.
Yes.
Because, of course, your perspective on refurbishment of the existing stock in India will be a very different perspective. Do you have any comments to make there about the particular issues that you face? I'm in the way again.
That's okay. Yeah, I think we have little different context here, and especially if you look at the residential stock, the average floor space area available to the human being in India is about 5.2 square meter per person, which needs to go up to probably about 17 or 25 square meter per person. And hence, we will be building far more new floor space. But if you recognize the economic situation, the new floor space which we will be adding needs to be far more thermally comfortable, and then we will not be able to rely simply on techno-fix like air conditioners, because that also will cost a lot, not just a capital cost, but also recurring cost. So retrofit is not so much of the focus right now here in the country, but some of the old buildings, I would say, not really residential building, but old institutional buildings, on even the commercial buildings which will be built in 60s to 90s, definitely will require very sensitive retrofitting approaches. Thank you.
Agree, Tim. Comprehensive response. Any other questions? Yes, please.
Sorry.
Could you wait for the microphone, please?
Yes.
I would like to ask you whether in the United States you have an equivalent to the TM54 methodology or for assessing overheating, or it is how you approach mechanical cooling. What is your approach towards mechanical cooling, and how you try to avoid it? I don't know. It's just I think that you don't have, but I'm not 100% sure because most of my experience.
Yes.
Are you clear on that question?
Yeah, but the first part of you said the equivalent to what?
To TM54 methodology by CIPSI that became our part of the UK building regulations
Okay.
about overheating, assessing overheating, and
Yes, Sheila may not be
Yeah,
familiar
I'm
with that.
Yes.
Kevin, can you interpret?
Yeah, it's a design methodology for the assessment of overheating risks in homes.
Okay, overheating risk. So it's
Yeah.
like a comfort?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, so there is the ASHRAE Standard 55, which is the standard that defines what comfort is in different types of indoor environments. So maybe that's,
but this applies also to naturally ventilated buildings.
Has it-
This applies to naturally ventilated buildings.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, so-
But it's not as elaborated as TM54 that we have specific internal gains to use, and like we have some specific way to approach. It's more. You are free to the architects and mechanical are free to use their own.
Yeah, as far as I know, there isn't an ASHRAE equivalent at the moment.
I
but
don't
not,
think
it's
so.
Quite this one's quite specific
Okay.
for CIPSI in the UK. But
Okay. Yes, I don't believe there is a one-to-one comparison. So the ASHRAE Standard 55 defines what is comfort in an indoor space, and then how you get there depends on the solutions that you find to do it. So you could do it by brute force and put a whole bunch of air conditioning in and just do it, or you could have the holistic approach and do passive solutions or other things. So I don't think there is a one-to-one comparison. But how do you, so you had a second part to the question now, and I...
No, it is just I'm trying to understand how, in terms of the new residential projects, they get assessed under building regs in the United States, and whether there are equivalent to the UK building regs and the technical memorandum. It just it is because I know that a lot of projects overseas, like in the Saudi Arabia or in other countries, they are assessed under the American standards, like because they have they follow lead assessment. So I want to see, yes, and for example, they're not like here we have a daylight factor assessment, so we have to have specific size of windows to make sure that we have daylight, and all these things contribute to the design of the building. Yes, interfere, but I'm trying to understand whether in the United States there is any interest on yes.
Yes, thank you for your question. I think this does raise a wider question also about the regulatory framework in different countries around the world. And indeed, as we all know, there are many countries where there is almost no regulatory framework to respond to. And so the response really relies very largely on what we might call good practice. And so I know from an involvement in Chile, in South America, for example, I was very surprised to find that there was very little regulation at all, but there was a great deal of interest among the professions in addressing these issues. So, yes, so...
I know, it's just maybe, yes, I don't know if there is any intention in the future to have the same, follow the same methodology we have in the UK. Like, I don't know, it's something, of whether there are any ASHRAE has any future plans to, I don't know, how.
Maybe you could have a conversation with Sheila after
Yes,
to take it further. Do we have any? Yes, please.
Hi, I'm sorry to that it's going to be another UK focused question. So I've noticed at least in England, quite a lot of new commercial build is built in a way that it's the glassed windows that do not open. So I was wondering about your thoughts on this, why it is the way it is, and what its effect on, well, the alternatives to air conditioning. Thank you.
This is a very good question too. Who would like to?
Well, I can start, I guess. Yes, I've observed that as well. However, there are some building owners and developers who are starting to change now, which I think is great. There are typically 3 reasons why developers opt for the sealed glazed unit, especially in speculative commercial developments. Number 1 is they're going to air condition anyway, so they want to seal tight, to get the infiltration down. The second is noise, because they're often in inner city locations and it's noisy. And the third is the outdoor air quality isn't great. So that's always been the logic. Now, when we break those down and challenge those, which I think we should, so do we really need to air condition, and do we need to air condition all the time? And if we've got a hybrid solution, then maybe we can have interlinks that if windows are open, then we shut off the AC system. That's been happening for ages. I've worked in the 90s on projects with chill beam systems, which obviously really worried about condensation on chill beams, so you don't want them to start raining, and we had interlinks then. So that's possible. You think about the noise aspect, then you look at potentially using landscaping to reduce the external noise, or maybe you're building in different locations. That's very site specific. And then you think about the outdoor air quality, then hopefully a lot of the steps that are being taken now will result in improved air quality sometime during the life of the building. I won't predict when. So we are seeing some buildings, and I think it's the building called the White Collar Factory building in Old Street. Yeah. So that's got opening windows, and that only I think that was opened about 3 or 4 years ago. So we are starting to see some of these norms being challenged and some change happening. I'm glad to say.
Thanks, Kevin. Sheila, Mike.
Thank you for a very, very good question. And I think if you look at housing and apartments in particular, then that would be, I think, a classic example of an archetype that might be likely to overheat would be a flat with unopenable windows, because if you're thinking of the cooling hierarchy, perhaps it's also associated with a lack of solar shading. So you're not rejecting or controlling the amount of heat entering the flat, and then you are unable or less likely to be able to effectively remove that flat. And even having one-sided ventilation wouldn't be effective as having two-sided ventilation. So I think you raise a really interesting point, and if we are to move towards passive solutions, then clearly we need to have opening windows which are capable of flushing the buildings appropriately. And we saw during the summer that the advice being given when to open your windows became much more critical. To think as carefully as possible about when you might open, if they are able to be open, opening them at night perhaps, but actually closing them perhaps counterintuitively during the day. So it does require this. Perhaps we haven't talked about it very much yet, but this issue of behaviour change as well. And as we move into this hotter new world, the new normal, behaviour needs to change, but that would require the ability to open the windows. So.
Yes. Sheila, would you any? No. Thank you. Excellent question. Yes.
Hi. So I'm here because I'm doing a PhD in the lack of cooling policy for residential homes, and we've got New Part O, for example. We've got TM52, TM59, and they're all working to sort of reduce overheating using passive measures. But there's nothing actually which stops people from having cooling in their homes. And I guess I've been thinking about it a lot, but I have this real fear that people will just go out and buy cooling units, and we might have this future where everyone has cooling in their homes by 2050. I guess what do you think about that scenario? And also to Sheila and Rajan, it'd be good to hear from your perspectives in countries where residents actually have quite a lot of cooling in their homes. How do they kind of, I don't know, what was the driver of that?
Yes, thank you. Again, a very good question. I think firstly, Mike, can you respond?
Well, it's an excellent point, I think, and I think that is a potentially huge danger, and which could potentially lead to substantial rises in emissions and also anthropogenic heat emissions into cities to contribute to urban heat islands, for example. So I think it is an important issue. But it's you're obviously aware. There's complex issues there. I mean, should we be banning people from buying cooling units? Well, that's quite a big step. But what could we be doing to make it less likely that people will need to resort to buying cooling? That goes back to this fundamental design of appropriately designed and built and operated dwellings, and that are compliant with the building regulations. And if people can live through several hot summers and realise that their home can cope with the heat, with effective behaviour change in there as well, I would argue that that's an important step to before considering an outright. Because I guess you can kind of argue, it's analogous to banning people having heating in their homes, and that's probably a step that we're a long way from yet. So.
But I have an example, actually. There is an interesting example in Nottingham. Nottingham City Council are adopting a very radical approach to try to push developers towards net zero. And one of their provisos is that the planning control will not accept a proposal for air conditioning unless they can demonstrate that natural ventilation or other means of passive cooling have been explored and evaluated in depth. So I think local councils, planning departments can have an influence there, and indeed in Nottingham they're trying to do so. But it does raise, as Mike says, raises a whole range of issues.
It was just to agree with you. We talked about regulation, but I think the issue of planning is one that's hugely important as well, and giving effective power to the councils to take, if they believe it's appropriate, that type of.
Yeah. Sheila,
Yes. All right. So you raise a really that is a very likely scenario, that as summers get hotter, people are going to say, the only way I can adapt is if I can provide mechanical cooling in my space, and they're going to try to do it. So how do we change that? It's a hard question, and personally I believe it will be a lot to do with policy, and whether that policy is forbidding it, that's one way to approach it, or policy changes that encourage a behavior that we want to have. So how do we help people know what their alternatives are, so that it's a hot summer and they're like, I need air conditioning, and they just go and buy a window unit or something? That's like the solution they know now. Do they know about the other solutions? Do they know the solutions such as cooling at night with having your windows open and shut them in the morning, and then it stays cool all day? It seems obvious to those of us in the room, but because that's what we think about all the time. It's the regular person on the street who just doesn't want to be hot anymore. They might not even know that that's a behavior change, that if they do it, not only is it something that they have control over right now, but it's going to save them money. They don't have to buy the unit, and then they don't have to pay to run the unit. So if we have a way to help them learn that that's an option that they have to them, and it's a better option, then we can impact the behaviors. And can we help them learn those things through policy? Or is there other types of policy that we can develop? And I don't know what the answer is yet, but someday I believe we are going to have policy out there that encourages us to prioritize decreasing carbon emissions, and that we will be rewarded for decreasing our emissions in some way. I don't know if it's going to be through tax incentives, if it's going to be through, maybe it's privileges for something, who knows? But we will have policy that evolves, that encourages the type of behavior that we want to have and reward the behavior that we want people to demonstrate. So it's coming, and that's part of that exciting solutions that we're all on the verge of figuring it out. Now, just real briefly on your other question, saying in the United States, well, the United States is a big place with a whole bunch of different climate zones, and not only that is just culturally, the federal government has a certain level of oversight, but the federal government doesn't tell the regular person what to do. That's very much ingrained in the American culture. I don't want the government telling me what to do. So there's not, how do you encourage people not to have air conditioning? Well, it's going to happen at more the local level. Like you just described, it's happening in Nottingham. And it's really exciting to know that that type of conversations happening in Nottingham, that it might be having some impact. And if we can start to have success stories like that coming out and encouraging other local jurisdictions to do similar types of work, I think that's how we're going to change it. At this point, yeah, if somebody wants air conditioning in the U.S., they go and buy air conditioning. And I'm looking at my husband back there in the corner because, yeah, that's the way it is. And we need to change there too. We don't have the answers there either.
Thanks, Sheila. Thanks. I'd like to bring in Rajan for one last time for your comments, Rajan, particularly perhaps on the points Sheila was making about incentives. How do we incentivize both developers and the ordinary people?
Sian, I think Brian was muted towards the last 10 seconds, but I think it's still muted. The building center microphone is still muted. Oh. Anyway, but let me move forward with whatever I heard. So no, I fully agree with what Sheila mentioned, and I think instead of incentivizing, I think it makes sense to go for a policy which mandates building construction, which doesn't require too much of air conditioning or almost no air conditioning. My perception is that people will buy air conditioner. I think our task should be that once they buy it, we need to make sure that they don't use it without, or rather they use it more responsibly. And large population in tropics that we are seeing in, especially when we adopt the ASHRAE methodology to understand thermal comfort, when you ask, are you comfortable? They will say, yes, we are comfortable. But when you say, but what you want to be, they will say, we want to be cooler. That means people are getting addicted to the cooling. And I think that's where all of us needs to work, that people should not get addicted to the cooling. If it is a requirement, it's a responsible use, definitely they must use it, but should not get addicted. That's my response.
I think we're now running out of time, in fact. And
we have 3 questions in the chat.
Oh, we have 3 questions in the chat. Shall we take those? Okay. We want to involve, of course, the not virtual audience, our Zoom audience, and we do have 3 questions. So we'll go through these.
We've got a few more than 3, but shall I just pick 3?
Well, Rajan, it's for you. 3? Yes, 3, please, if you could.
So, first one, what are the indicators you would use, e.g. percentage of the year that the buildings can operate solely with natural ventilation, a proxy for the climate resilience of a building? And that's from Susan Roth. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Did you all hear that? No, I think we need a bit louder. Sorry.
What are the indicators you would use, e.g. percentage of the year that the buildings can operate solely with natural ventilation, a proxy for the climate resilience of a building?
Indicators?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good indicator, because we know that passively designed buildings, there is going to be a fluctuation in the internal conditions. It's not going to be, conditions aren't going to be maintained rigidly at one condition throughout the year. So looking at the number of hours per year, breaking that down to months to get a more accurate profile, I think that's a pretty good indicator. And of course, you've got to be careful about which measurement of comfort you use. Is it UTC? Is it PMV, PPD, or whatever? But nevertheless, there's a whole basket to choose there. So, but yes, I think broadly speaking, that kind of works for me.
Yes, thanks, Kevin. A good question which needs to be worked on, but I think Kevin, yeah, I think number of hours reasonable. Yes. I won't go to the others. So the second question.
From Amika F.A. Osaji, what will be the impact of an increase in air conditioning on the national grid?
The impact of what will be the impact of air conditioning on national?
Air conditioning increases. On
Yes,
the
if
national grid.
air conditioning increases. I think one of the statistics we came up with in the special issue is that if we pursue the current trends, use of air conditioning is going to increase globally by 700% by 2050. This is clearly a bit of a problem, and this is why we're addressing it now. But yes, from my perspective, this is preempting what you were saying, but clearly we can't just say, well, the answer is decarbonisation, the grid's going to take care, we just carry on using air conditioning as per normal. We do need to reduce the load. Who would like to? Sheila, maybe.
I'll comment on that question. These challenges that we're facing are very integrated with one another. And so, yes, we will be seeing increased demand because of things like more use of air conditioning. We're going to see increased demand for other things too, like electrifying our transportation sector, by electrifying our building sector as we aim to try to decarbonize that. There are lots of things that are going to, if the only thing we do is look at the increased use, is going to have some major impacts. But keep in mind too that our infrastructure, the infrastructure that provides power to all of these end users is changing as well. And I heard a comment recently that I thought was really interesting. It's like, if we continue to try to solve our new challenges that we're facing now, especially with how we use energy, using an infrastructure that was designed 100 or more years ago, we're not going to get there. That we have new problems and we need to find new solutions on both sides of the problems, both on the user side, the demand side, as well as the generation transmission side of things. And organically, that's already happening. We're seeing a lot more renewables as part of our generation mix. We're seeing new technologies for storage, for large-scale energy storage, that it's now becoming a viable solution that is becoming a part of that infrastructure where we are drawing our energy from so that we can take advantage of the intermittency of the renewables on the generation side. So all of these pieces are going to come together. Who's going to be figuring that out? That's the big question. Because, I mean, we're buildings engineers. We care what's happening behind the meter, you know, what's happening on our side of the meter where we're drawing energy from that system and using it. But how do we contribute to the solutions that need to occur on the other side of the meter as well? And those are thinking about things like on-site generation in our built projects. How do we incorporate storage into our systems? How do we think about more flexible control of our systems so that we are actually operating the buildings that match with what's happening on the other side of the meter, so that we're using energy when energy is available. So for example, you have a lot of solar on the system. Usually the solar generation peaks about the same time the air conditioning loads peak. So that's a good thing. So that means that there's actually more energy to be used on the grid at the time that our air conditioning systems need that energy. These are big questions we don't have answers to, but I feel like it's important that those of us in this industry are aware that the decisions that we're making for our buildings have impacts beyond the building, and we need to be thinking about how is this larger energy system going to behave, and how do we participate in those conversations so that we can find those greater solutions? It goes back to collaboration, it goes back to policy, it's just, everything is all mixed together.
Thanks, Sheila. Mike, would you like to go?
One quick point. Just the point that as we become increasingly reliant on electricity, then we become potentially increasingly vulnerable to the effects of climate change on the electrical supply system. So during periods of heat, as the cables sag, for example, then just at the point where you might most need that air conditioning, you might encounter those failures. So I think that whole issue of also adapting to the ensure that it's a robust, resilient electrical supply system is a big one as well.
Indeed, it's very, very salutary, isn't it, to note that there were blackouts in both Beijing and New York, I think in 2019. When did the blackouts occur? Well, during heat waves in those two cities. So right at the time when you need air conditioning the most, it fails because your energy supply fails. That's certainly one issue. The other is, and I think we're all aware of it right now, is price. Energy costs are worldwide. Energy costs are rising. So I think we're going to be developing a different attitude towards energy quite rapidly. But should we have the final question? Because I'm aware we're now at 20 to 8. Oh, we're okay. Okay. Sorry.
Question from Doa Alamoudi. What would the world look like if caps were introduced on how much cooling or heating one could get?
Who would like to take this? Caps on. Where's this question going?
I think it's a policy question myself.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, I think there are huge issues of equity in this, and I mean, how will it be capped? I don't know, but will it be capped via price or So I think it's a big question. I don't think we're going to be able to answer in a few minutes, but it's a hugely important point. But there are massive issues of equity as we adapt to climate change, both in the UK and elsewhere. And I think that question has all kinds of huge discussions about lots of things, but definitely including equity.
I will add something, and I think in a way, whether it's capped or not, this is a scarce resource, and we all ought to treat it as though it is a scarce resource. It's not unlimited. Even if we can afford it ourselves personally, we have a responsibility to reduce the amount of energy that we're actually using. So there's a social question there and a moral question as well, not just a policy question, I think.
Indeed. And maybe I could try and bring in Rajan if you're following the conversation. Whether, Rajan, you can respond on this issue of possible capping of energy supply or indeed the equity issue.
No, definitely it's an equity issue. I think heating and cooling is not just a luxury, it is a necessity in certain context. And hence, when will you cap, how much will you cap, to whom will you put this cap? A lot of question needs to be answered before we even think about capping. But predominantly, it's I don't think that mankind has got anything by capping anything. And the moment we start looking at the technology advancement and behavioral change and so we'll be able to get there. I think I am quite optimistic that we will not require certain kind of policy intervention where we really need to cap something, and especially a resource like heating and cooling. Thanks.
Time for one more question, if.
From Wasim, how far is the AEC industry prepared to utilize alternative cooling and refrigeration systems, phasing out CFC and HCFC refrigerant, deploying more sustainable alternatives throughout the complete value chain at the required pace to achieve carbon neutrality, both for new buildings and for current available stock?
Big question. I think we've been trying to address these all evening, I think.
Brian, if I can come in.
I'll just make a couple of comments on, yeah, this is a good question, and it's, the whole point of the Kigali Agreement and why we have so many nations that have signed on to that and working towards it. It is one of the most important focus areas of the research that ASHRAE is investing in right now, is to find alternative forms to provide cooling with low global warming potential refrigerants. And what are those refrigerants, and how do we define low GWP? I mean, lower than what we have now, or should the numbers be even lower than that? We don't have answers yet. The good news is that it's ASHRAE, it's private industry, it's universities. There's just a lot of work going into finding that next generation of refrigerants or a next generation way of providing cooling, recognizing that we are on a trend of a warming planet, or cooling across the planet. Did you say 700% increase across the planet? We're going to be seeing increased need for providing cooled spaces, and how do we do that in a way that does not have an exponential increase into the greenhouse gases that we're emitting into our atmosphere? It's a major priority right now. So that's the good news, is that we recognize the priority and we're working on it. Yeah.
Yeah, indeed. Thanks, Sheila. I'm going to turn for our last question to, yes, sir. Oh, Peter, sorry. Little Peter.
Hi, I got this right. Yeah, over sort of many years, it seems to me that we have technology, and we have the possibility of solutions to technology. Some we've got at the moment, some need research. And then we've got, am I doing this right? That way better? Right. And then you've got the politics and the economics of it and the capital of all of this. And the big question to me, and I suppose with you Neil or otherwise, is in the UK, the big issues are the ability to find suitable refurbishment solutions, be they for the commercial sector, most of which is medium-sized old stock, not the big beautiful new, not the Gherkins and things like that, and the housing is all old. What we actually need are solutions which meet this golden thread of standardized solutions that people can use. Clients generally are not going to pay for the research. Clients want the job done by whoever they've employed, the designer, the consulting engineer, and he will go, what is the standard solution for that? Here's solution number 7 off the shelf. It fits this job. How much, and that applies certainly a need for that, a desperate need for that in the residential sector, and it actually is required also in the commercial sector, because I've seen multiple refurbishments of both, where opportunities are not taken because nobody has the real willingness or to put them a hand in the pocket or to go through all the pain of doing it. Are we any closer to addressing those pains?
Yes.
That's the question.
Yes, a good question, and indeed very, very relevant in a very, very rapidly changing context. I'm thinking of the change in use of commercial buildings, and that maybe we're going to have to explore those opportunities. But is this an opportunity for the educational institutions, or indeed the professional institutes, to support new solutions, which then can be offered to clients and practitioners?
So yeah, I think it is another area where collaboration is needed, between the institutions, academia, and also I would suggest industry as well, so the manufacturers, to develop these standard solutions. I would also say, Peter, I think especially in the residential existing building stock, we've got commercial issues there, not so much just the stand. One of which is kind of all. So, if I put existing housing into two categories: owner occupied and rented. In the rented, you've got the landlord-tenant issue, haven't you? You know, so the landlord has to pay for the capital upgrades, but the tenants are paying the bills and also suffering potentially with poor internal conditions. I think that inequity needs to be solved. And the other category of residential stock is owner-occupied, and I think with the raising bills of electricity and gas, then I think more people are moving to improve the insulation, improve the air tightness, and potentially putting renewables on. And I think that balance is kind of almost addressing itself naturally. But I think you're right. We need collaboration to find more standard solutions to help.
Thanks. I think at this point, then, I think we'll have to wrap it up.